every war has its official history, written in ink and filed away for the public record. And then, there is the history that was meant to be erased, faded reports, tucked deep within the archives, that tell an impossible story. A story of soldiers in the jungles of Southeast Asia, driven back not by an enemy they could see, but by a force that was simply invisible. Of troops in the forests of Europe, officially silenced after witnessing entities that were not human. And a single haunting photograph from a remote Pacific beach, capturing a creature that blurred the very line between what is man and what is not. These accounts were buried, but they were never truly lost. We begin where the first file creaks open, the suffocating heat of the Malayan jungle. In the state of Negri Sembilan, there was a small island of routine, floating in that suffocating heat. It was a café run by Claude, an Eastern European expatriate who had learned that survival in occupied land depended on predictability. The clink of his cups, the smell of his coffee, the slow turn of the ceiling fan. These were the quiet constants in a world at war. His regulars were the Japanese soldiers. Usually, they'd return from patrols loud and arrogant, their boots heavy on his floorboards. But then, it changed. It was subtle at first. They started coming back from the jungle, not with the weariness of battle, but with a silent, hunted look in their eyes. They would sit clustered together, away from the windows, their conversations reduced to frantic whispers that would instantly cease if Claude so much as glanced in their direction. A dropped spoon would make them flinch. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were frightened children hiding from the dark. Claude, the quiet observer, saw more. He saw the scratches. When they paid, he'd see the marks on their hands and arms. They weren't the jagged tears of thorns or the messy work of an animal. These were clean, deep lines, as if drawn by something impossibly sharp. Rumors began to bleed from the barracks into the town, of an invisible attacker in the trees, something that stalked their patrols without making a sound. The Japanese command, however, had no room for such stories. They needed a rational explanation, a tangible enemy, and their eyes fell on the outsider, the neutral observer in the center of it all, Claude. One afternoon, an officer entered the café, his face a mask of cold authority. The charge was sabotage. He accused Claude of aiding the resistance, of creating these stories to weaken morale. But then, something astonishing happened. One of the young soldiers, the one who trembled the most, stood up. He spoke to his officer, his voice shaking but firm, defending the café owner. Then another joined him, and another. They spoke of what they had seen, of the fear that was real, validating the very mystery their superiors wanted to erase. They weren't defending Claude, the man. They were defending the only truth they had left. The officer, faced with this quiet mutiny, was forced to back down. He left, the threat of a military tribunal evaporating into the humid air. For a moment, Claude felt a wave of relief. He was safe. But when he looked at the soldiers, he saw the relief was his alone. They weren't leaving. They were watching the door, watching the tree line visible through the windows, their faces pale with dread. He had been cleared of a crime he didn't commit, but in doing so, his small cafe had just become their fortress. And they had just invited the thing they feared most, right to his doorstep. They hit the door as if something were right behind them. The latch gave, wood slammed inward, and 5 soldiers stumbled into Claude's cafe. One kicked the door shut, another threw the bolt and dragged a chair under the handle. For a moment, the only sound was their breathing. Thin, ragged, fighting for air. "Lock it," one of them rasped. "Don't let it in." Claude, cloth still in his hand, saw at once that they were not men arriving to take control. Mud streaked their uniforms, leaves clung to their sleeves, and their eyes, had the wild, unblinking look of animals driven out of cover. The story came in broken pieces. A clearing at the jungle's edge. No shots, no shadows, just an impact that lifted them off their feet. One of them, a corporal, kept repeating the same line, as if it were the only part he trusted. "It hit us," he said. "Didn't see a thing. Just thrown. Like something swatting flies. Whatever had dragged them up only to fling them down had chased them through the trees, all the way to the dim square of light from Claude's window." When their words ran out, the café fell still. They leaned their backs into the locked wooden door, as if their weight alone could hold the world outside. Claude stood behind his counter, watching their shoulders rise and fall. The first sign that something was wrong was not a sound. It was the pressure. It dropped in an instant, a lurch that made ears pop as if the room had climbed a mountain. The air thinned. The windows and door were sealed tight, yet a wind woke inside. No draft crept through cracks. The air arrived as a single hard gust that tore across the floor. Napkins lifted and spun. The tin coffee cups on their hooks began to tremble, then rattle against each other in a nervous metallic tapping. With the wind came the sound. It began as a low hum under the floorboards, so deep the glassware shivered, and the men felt it in their chests before they could hear it. One soldier tried to start a prayer and lost the words halfway through. The hum split and rose, twisting into something like voices, though no human throat could have made them. Guttural, layered, they braided over one another until the café itself seemed to be giving off sound. Screams poured from every surface at once, too many to separate, all of them furious. The sergeant at the door jerked as if an unseen hand had taken hold of him. An invisible force drove into his ribs and lifted him off the floor, the same way it had in the trees. He flew sideways, hit the far wall, and dropped onto the tiles. Air punched out of him in a thin wheeze. Another soldier folded himself under the heavy oak table, hands clamped over his ears as the legs rattled against the boards. A third man snapped his rifle to his shoulder on pure reflex, eyes wide, tracking empty space. There was nothing to aim at. Whatever was attacking them was moving through the air itself. The gale thickened. Breath was snatched from mouths before lungs could claim it. The sound pressed against their bodies like water at depth. Training finally pushed through terror. Two of the soldiers broke from the door and fired into the empty center of the café. The crack of their rifles was swallowed almost at once. Plaster jumped from the far wall. Glass shattered in the window panes, yet nothing blew in and nothing blew out. The wind and the voices belonged to the room now. With every shot, they were only tearing up the one shelter they had left. Stop. Just for a moment. Picture it. You're a soldier, trained for any enemy you can see. But now the enemy is the air itself. The screams have no throat. Your bullets pass through nothing. In a world defined by force, what happens when the only thing that can save you is a word? Orders and fresh volleys disappeared into the same boiling noise. The floor shuddered in short, repeated jolts. Dust sifted from the ceiling. One of the tin cups tore free from its hook and flew across the room, ringing off the counter before spinning on the boards. Through all of it, Claude watched, pale but steady, following each movement the way a man watches the sea when a storm rises faster than it should. He saw the moment discipline broke, the rifles turning in useless circles, the radios and ammunition dangling from men who no longer had anything solid to fight. Their gear, all the metal and circuitry they trusted, clattered and swung with them, dead weight in a room where nothing visible could be touched. Behind the counter, Claude's hands were empty, while the soldiers curled around their weapons and ducked behind splintering furniture. The quiet cafe owner did the one thing that made no sense. He stepped out from his post into the screaming wind, and walked toward the shaking door as if he were moving down a pier into very deep water. To the soldiers, the unseen thing tearing their world apart was a demon from a nightmare. But for Claude, it wasn't a nightmare. It was a memory. A memory of old stories told by village elders in the shade of the afternoon. Tales of the spirits that own the land. Not monsters to be fought, but fiercely territorial guardians. In the local tongue, they called them the Djinn. And Claude, who had spent a lifetime listening, understood. This wasn't an attack. It was an eviction notice, served with supernatural rage. That was the decision he made as he walked. He wasn't walking toward a monster. He was walking toward an angered landowner whose home had been trespassed upon by men of iron and fire. He reached the simple wooden door, the barrier between their world and the shrieking chaos. His hand, steady, closed around the handle. He turned it, and he opened the door, stepping out alone to face the storm. The wind didn't rip him apart. The force that had thrown a grown man across the room simply held, waiting. And into that pressurized silence, Claude spoke. Not in the harsh commands of Japanese or the clipped tones of English, but in the soft, respectful dialect of the land itself. He didn't issue a challenge. He offered an apology. He acknowledged the spirit's domain, its rightful anger. He explained that they were just lost travelers, caught in a war that wasn't their own, and that they meant no harm, asking only for passage. And the most incredible thing happened. The rage-filled metallic scream that had been drilling into their skulls faltered. It dropped in pitch, becoming a deep, guttural groan of pain. Claude spoke again, his voice still quiet, still respectful. The groan dissolved into a series of sorrowful, raspy whispers that seemed to curl in the air around them. Then, with one final, sighing breath, complete silence. The pressure in the room vanished. The air was still. The war, for a moment, was over. One encounter, in a forgotten corner of Malaya, resolved not with force, but with understanding. But the secret histories of that war were written on many fronts. And as we'll see, an incident unfolding at that very same time, deep in the frozen forests of Europe, would teach a far colder lesson. That some boundaries, once crossed, demand not a conversation, but absolute silence. September 1944. The forests of eastern France are a landscape of ghosts. The fighting, just weeks after the landings in Normandy, has been brutal. For 3 American soldiers, James, Thomas, and Michael, the war has become an endless cycle of mud, fear, and exhaustion. Every tree looks the same. Every shadow could be the enemy. During a long patrol, the sound of a distant stream offers a brief, tantalizing promise. A break. A moment of peace. Thomas, the youngest, remembers a map. A small, secluded lake just off their route. A place to wash the grime from their faces. To feel human again for just a few minutes. It was a small act of rebellion against the war itself. It was their first mistake. They pushed through a final, dense line of pine trees, the scent of damp earth heavy in the air. Their faces were ready for the cool side of water. But there was no lake. The clearing was there, just as the map suggested. But where the water should have been, there was no reflection of the sky. In its place, something impossible rested in a bed of crushed ferns and snapped branches. It was a huge metallic disc, like 2 saucers placed lip to lip, perfectly smooth, without seams or rivets. It sat unnaturally balanced on a tripod of 3 slender legs. There was no smoke, no fire, just a complete and profound stillness that felt heavier than any sound. James's rifle slipped from his grasp, clattering softly against a rock. No one noticed. Thomas was frozen mid-stride, his hand half raised as if to part a branch that was no longer there. They all saw it at the same time. Figures, moving around the base of the craft. They weren't men. Their movements were slow, deliberate. They had thin limbs, grayish skin that seemed to absorb the dim forest light, and large, dark, almond-shaped eyes that reflected nothing. They seemed to be performing repairs, their focus entirely on the silent machine. The world of mud and rifles and orders. It all dissolved in that one silent moment. The boundary of their reality had not just been crossed, it had been erased. Quietly, slowly, they backed away, tree by tree. Not a word was spoken until the clearing was a distant memory, and the sound of their own frantic heartbeats returned. Their first instinct, the one drilled into them by training and duty, was clear. They had to report it. They had to tell someone what they saw. Crouching in the undergrowth, miles from that silent clearing, they made their decision. And in doing so, they made their second and far more dangerous mistake. They believed that what they had seen could be spoken of. The official response was not disbelief. It was something far colder. Containment. The soldiers were debriefed by their commanding officer, a man whose face betrayed nothing and sworn to absolute secrecy. A follow-up, they were told, was being arranged. They were to wait. And so they did, in the damp chill of their tent, the silence between them now heavy with a new kind of fear. The strangeness of the clearing felt distant. The strangeness of their own camp was now immediate and suffocating. That night, their visitors arrived. The canvas flap of their tent was pushed aside without a sound, and two men stepped inside, seeming to pull the darkness in with them. They were not military. They were tall, unnervingly so, and wore pristine black suits that seemed to repel the grime and damp of the camp. But it was their faces. Their faces were what stopped the breath in the soldiers' lungs. They were out of proportion, the features not quite fitting together correctly. Their skin had a taut, waxy appearance, and a grayish, sickly hue, as if it had never been touched by the sun. They moved with a liquid grace that was entirely out of place, and the air grew still and cold around them. One of them spoke, his voice a perfect empty monotone. "James Allen, your mother, Eleanor, in Lexington, Kentucky. We trust she's well." James felt the world tilt. The image of his mother on her front porch, so solid, so real, was suddenly fragile, held hostage in this damp tent by a man whose face was a nightmare. Before he could even form a thought, the voice continued, turning its attention. "Thomas Clark, your wife, Sarah, and the boy, William." A strong name for a newborn. That was the moment. For Thomas, it was the sound of his son's name in that dead voice. It was the click in his mind that said, this is not a bluff. It wasn't just a threat. The knowledge was impossible, which meant their power was impossible. And the impossible was standing 2 feet in front of him. The men who had faced down machine gun fire, who had charged enemy lines, were completely and utterly broken. This wasn't a battle of bullets and steel. It was a psychological vivisection, and they were pinned to the table. The man spoke one last time. "Michael, your brother is with the 4th Marine Division in the Pacific. It would be a shame if his tour was complicated. You will never speak of what you saw in that clearing. Not to anyone. Ever." Then, as silently as they arrived, they turned and left. The tent flap fell closed, and the normal sounds of the camp rushed back in. A cough from a nearby tent, the distant hum of a generator. It was as if they had never been there. The official camp logs and sentry reports would later confirm it. There was no record of any visitors to their tent that night. No car, no footprints, no one. The boundary of their reality had been breached and then sealed, leaving them trapped inside a new, silent world. A silence imposed by men in black was a chilling, absolute horror. It was a violation of the soul. But there are other silences in this world, older, deeper ones. Silences that rise not from human conspiracy, but from the deep, strange grammar of the earth itself, where the very definition of life begins to blur. And it's to one of those silences we must now turn. That silence has a name and a place. Morotai Island, 1944. A remote stretch of coastline in Indonesia, repurposed by the Allies as a strategic foothold in the Pacific War. For a U.S. soldier named Rain Mard, it was just another sweltering afternoon. The air was thick with salt and diesel, heat pressing through his uniform. Looking for a sliver of quiet away from the engines, and shouted orders, he walked down toward the shore, where a small group of local fishermen were hauling in their nets. The scene felt older than the base behind him, bare feet braced in wet sand, hands working in an easy, practiced rhythm against the pull of the sea. He lingered, letting the simple, ordinary labor steady his thoughts. He almost missed the moment things changed. The men's voices rose together, not in alarm, but in the clipped, breathless shouts of shared effort. Shoulders hunched, backs bent, the rope cut deeper grooves into the sand, as if something far heavier than a normal catch had taken hold. The net came in slower now, each pull a strain. As the mesh finally slid out of the surf and onto the shining strip of sand, Rain saw what they had pulled from the water. For a heartbeat, he simply stared, his training supplying a checklist of what he should do with a body, while his mind refused to name what he was looking at. His breath hitched in his throat. The background noise of the beach fell away. Stretched out in the net, the thing ran maybe 7 feet from head to tail. The upper half read, at a glance, as human, too human for his comfort. Pinkish skin, smooth and slick with seawater, glistened against the darker lines of rope. Then the face pulled him in. Rough-boned, almost primitive, long dark hair plastered to its shoulders, like any person just dragged from the surf. Until he saw the nose. Long, sharp, a hard blade of cartilage jutting forward like the bill of a swordfish. A word flickered up from childhood stories. Mermaid. And he recoiled from it at once. Whatever lay in that net did not belong to any tale he had ever been told. What held him was not the face, though. It was the hands. Tangled in the ropes, they flailed weakly, fingers opening and closing as they tried to find leverage. Only when he started counting did the real wrongness land. 4 long, slender fingers. And then, another thumb, set opposite the first, flexing on each hand. Every diagram of human bones he had ever seen, every quiet assumption about how a hand is supposed to look, buckled under that one small detail. Yet the extra thumbs were right there, knuckles whitening around wet rope, insisting that the impossible had weight and texture. Rain tore his gaze away from those hands and looked to the fisherman. The creature gasped on the sand, sides heaving, but the men did not step back in fear or circle in wonder. One of them kicked the net flatter with his heel to keep the body from rolling. Another leaned in, grabbed a fold of mesh, and hefted it slightly, as if judging the weight of a large tuna. They spoke to each other in low, practical bursts, their attention on knots and lines rather than on the desperate movements inside them. No one crossed themselves. No one hesitated. On that open stretch of beach, Rain Mard felt suddenly alone with what he was seeing. A miracle and a tragedy knotted into the same shape. To the men beside him, it was just a catch. To him, it was a life caught between 2 worlds, dragged out of its depth, and left to suffocate in the open air. And as that realization settled in, cold and heavy, he understood that no one else was going to step in or speak up. If anything was going to change what happened next, the decision would have to come from him. And in that moment, the world shrank to the space between him and the creature. The fishermen, having done their part, simply walked away, their bare feet leaving quickly fading prints in the wet sand. They left the living, breathing thing on the beach to die, as if it were nothing more than a tangled piece of driftwood. A war started inside of Rainmard. A quiet, terrible war. The humane part of him, the part that saw a life in its last moments, screamed at him to do something, to drag it back to the water, to give it a chance. His hand twitched, his fingers lifting just slightly, an aborted gesture of help. But then the fear, cold and heavy, washed over him. A fear of the unknown, a fear of some disease it might carry, and a deeper, more confusing fear, the fear of violating a local custom he couldn't possibly understand. He was a guest here, an intruder. The thought echoed in his head, a weak excuse against the sound of labored breathing. It's not my place. What can I even do? He made his choice. Or rather, he allowed the choice to be made for him by his own paralysis. He did nothing. He forced his feet, which felt like they were cast in lead, to turn. He walked away. He did not run. He walked, deliberately, forcing himself not to look back. The sound of his own boots crunching on the sand was deafening, a desperate attempt to cover the sound he was leaving behind. This act of inaction, this turning of his back, would become a burden so much heavier than any physical weight he could have ever lifted. He would learn later, in a casual conversation, that the locals called them orang Ikan, fish people. He was told they were just another animal from the deep. Sometimes they were even eaten. The fact was delivered with a shrug, and it was that shrug that broke something inside him. His choice wasn't a choice made in the face of a monster, but in the face of a Tuesday. A mundane horror. The memory never left him. Not the creature's strange, almost human face, but the sound of its breathing, the sight of his own back as he walked away, and the deep, permanent scar of knowing he had failed a test he never knew he was taking. So we have 3 stories, 3 echoes from the war's shadowed edge. The soldier in Malaya, who chose to offer respect to the unknown. The men in the forest, who were forced into a pact of silence, and now reign marred on a remote shore, who made the simple, devastating choice of inaction. Respect. Silence. Choice. Each one a different way of drawing a line between our world and another. And it forces us to ask the final, central question. When the official histories are written, which stories are we trained to remember? And which are we engineered to forget? The ones that don't fit. The fragments that break the narrative of history. A spiritual negotiation in a Malaysian jungle. A technological warning delivered in a silent French forest. A biological paradox, abandoned on a remote Indonesian shore. 3 stories from a single war, each one an encounter that should not have happened. This brings us to the question that lingers in the silence after such accounts. Were these simply apparitions of the mind? Collective hallucinations born from the immense, crushing stress of combat? The brain's desperate attempt to give a familiar shape to chaos and fear? History, as it is written, lies like the surface of a calm sea. Smooth, seeming complete. But these accounts are the hairline fractures in that surface, the places where you glimpse a depth below. They don't prove the world is stranger than our textbooks admit, but they press against that possibility, hinting at a parallel record official narratives have no language for. From the jungle entity that demanded respect to the quiet men who enforced silence, one thread runs through every scene. These truths, whatever their origin, were treated as something to be experienced, then buried, never meant for the record. And so, the official record is closed. It ends where the reports stop, where stories are cleaned up for print and ceremony. But this other record, our unwritten one, remains open. It lives in retellings and faded details, in late-night conversations and quiet testimonies, carried by people who can't quite let these encounters go.
3 stories? 3 impossible encounters? All swallowed by the fog of war. You can file them away as the mind cracking under pressure, or see them as loose threads tugging at the edge of what we call history.
Which way do you lean? And which of these suppressed moments stays with you the most? Share your theory below, and treat your words as another line in this unwritten record. A quiet entry in the case file we're building together.